Welcome to the Ball State University Libraries. I'm John Straw, Archives and Special Collections Librarian. Perhaps you've wandered by the Archives and Special Collection doors on the second floor of the Alexander M. Bracken Library, or seen us on the web and wondered what goes on in here. This is your opportunity to find out, as I open the doors and invite you in to see some of the treasures on the other side. This is the first in a series of videos on the collections and services of Archives and Special Collections. Each one will cover a different area: rare books and manuscripts, Ball State University Archives, Stokoe Archives of Local History Materials, and the Middletown Studies Collection. We will look at the resources available in each area, how to access them, and how to use them. In addition, I will be joined by a series of guests to help look at the resources and discuss different topics. This series is intended to provide a virtual window into Archives and Special Collections and its resources. Our website at www.bsu.edu/library/collections/archives provides a lot of information. Finding aids to many of the collections are located here. Many digital resources are also available, including online exhibits and the Middletown Digital Archives, where you can find thousands of photographs. Contact information is also available on the site. While we will look at each of the areas listed on the website in more detail in future parts of the series, this first installment will focus on the area of rare books and manuscripts. Rare books in Archives and Special Collections include first editions, fine printings and bindings, autographed copies, special formats, and other items of significant value. All books are cataloged and can be located by searching the library's CardCat at www.bsu.edu/library. In addition, Archives and Special Collections houses manuscript material. Major holdings are described on the website and include American Almanac Collection, Elizabeth Ball Collection, French Revolution pamphlets, Ku Klux Klan Collection, Modern American Poetry Collection, Radical Pamphlets Collection, To help me take a closer look at a few of the items in this area of Archives and Special Collections, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Frank Felsenstein, Reed D. Varan Honors Distinguished Professor in Humanities, who teaches in the English Department and the Honors College at Ball State University. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Felsenstein. The most appropriate place, I think, to begin is with the earliest items in the Archives and Special Collections, and that would be illuminated manuscripts. To take a look at those, you already have your gloves on. I'm also going to put my white gloves on for handling these valuable and rare documents. Would you tell us a little bit about illuminated manuscripts?
Thank you, John. And to work in the Rare Book Library is the best way to begin to talk about books. We have here a number of very early illuminated manuscripts. They date from the late medieval period. The one that I'm holding up is a leaf from a Bible. We don't know exactly where it came from, but we can at least give some indication of what is included here. What you have is a grid that has been prepared, and on that one can see the remarkable work of the scribe and then of the illuminator with these decorated letters which are here. And one can just see at the top here whereabouts in the Bible this is. It's from St. Paul to the Romans. And this is a good example of a number of manuscripts of this kind that you have, many of which have very beautiful decorations to them. The two that we're holding up here alongside the Bible leaf are great examples of these. Most of them that we're going to show you are single leaves, and unfortunately many books of hours and Bibles and rare books of this kind, manuscripts of this sort, were separated in the 19th and early 20th century, and dealers would sell them individually, and that is how some of these sheets came to the rare book collection here. What's particularly interesting about this is that we can relate it in many ways to the earliest printed book, which we have here in facsimile. That is the Gutenberg Bible of 1455. And what I would like to do is to hold up, as you're doing, the fourth chapter of Paul to the Romans, and then to see the earlier version in the manuscript. And I think what one sees when one looks at early books like this is the way in which the first printers tried to copy the style of formal writing which one might associate with the late medieval period. And you can even see that it says here, ad Romanus, to the Romans. We actually do have as well, and I wonder whether you could take this out, John, we have a leaf. We don't have, unfortunately, a Gutenberg Bible. There are very few that have survived intact. But
I believe that there are 47 intact Bibles
right.
about
Yes,
right now
yes.
of the Gutenberg, and this is an example that we have, which is
Yes.
Hosea.
The Library of Congress, the New York Public Library, one at Pierpont Morgan have full copies of the Gutenberg Bible. But Ball State is very fortunate to have a full sheet. And that is from the Old Testament, from Hosea. And it's interesting to look at that alongside the facsimile. The reason for doing that, and if you can just pull that up here, John, the reason for doing that is to show how the style of decoration can differ from one copy to the next, so that early printed books were individualized in this way. It's called, this is the first book, it's known as the 42-line Bible because the average line length is 42 lines. It's supposed to have been set up probably over a period of about 3 or 4 years. And Gutenberg, we think, might have used as many as 6 presses to do this work. It is extraordinary that the earliest printed book should happen to be the Bible.
I should note that many of the items that we're looking at, Dr. Felsenstein, came from the collection of Elizabeth Ball, daughter of George Ball, one of the original Ball brothers. The next item that we want to take a look at, in fact, is what's called an incunabula. And incunabula basically means from the cradle of printing, which would have been around 1455 to 1450, to 1500. This one is actually from 1499. Can you tell us a little bit about this and about incunabula in general?
Yes, this is a fine example of a late incunabulum from, as you say, 1499. When one first looks at an early book, a book from this period, the first thing that you notice is the binding, and this is blind stamped. That is the form of decoration that is there, and it's also clasped. The likelihood is that it would have been shelved not in the way in which many modern books are, with the spine facing out, but perhaps on its side. And if one looks very closely, you can actually see a title which is there on the spine itself. We have to open the clasp with some care, and if one is looking at early books, the usual place to which one will turn is not the front of the book, but the end and what is known as a colophon. What's interesting about the colophon here is that it says exactly when the book was completed, who the printer was. His name was Ottomari, and the year 1499. This book was printed in Tübingen in Germany by Ottmar, who had comparatively recently become the printer to the University of Tübingen. Before then, he'd worked in another town called Reutlingen, and when his son became a student at Tübingen, he thought it might be appropriate for him to move to Tübingen as well, and shortly after he was given this appointment as a printer for the university. It's quite interesting. This particular book is a book of sermons of a man called Gabriel Biel, who actually had taught at the University of Tübingen. Here is the title page. It looks like a modern half title, really. And Gabriel Biel is often thought of as the last of the medieval scholastics in the Aristotelian school. And he was obviously highly thought of in the University of Tübingen. When he died in 1495, the university felt that it was fit to collect together a volume of his sermons. What's also interesting here, I opened it at random, and you can see that there is a kind of space here, and that is where a rubricator would have added the individual letters. So what you can see there is Piritu. There should be an S in front of it, Spiritu. But for some reason, and that's very common actually with incunabula, these would be bought, and it would be up to the individual owner whether he or she would wish to have it rubricated. This one is unrubricated, but what is remarkable about it is its completeness. And when one thinks about it, given the age of the book, 1499, more than 500 years, that it is in such remarkably fine condition. It's a great example of an incunabulum.
I think also of interest is, with rare books like this, is the provenance of these. And sometimes you can determine the provenance and other times you can't. So.
Yes, the provenance is particularly interesting, and if one were to look at this, one would find that it had belonged to a monastic house or a nunnery, I believe, and then eventually obviously was sold and found its way to the United States, and through the Ball family found its way to its present place here in the library.
Well, you mentioned monastic libraries, and that actually leads us to our next item, which is, it's called a chained book. And this is an example here. Unfortunately, the chain has come loose, but the chain used to be on here. This is a cornucopia of Nicholas Perotus, and it's from about 1506. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of chain books and
yes,
what
indeed.
they were all about?
Indeed. I think what one should realize is that books were things of great value. They were very expensive to produce, and only so many people who were particularly wealthy could afford to have their own libraries of books at this time. And many universities and also monastic houses would have their libraries as dedicated places where students could work. But unlike nowadays, where a student would come, say, to the Bracken Library and borrow a book, I doubt whether you'd allow him to borrow this one, but where somebody would come to borrow a regular book, at that time it was necessary to preserve the books in the library, particularly when you think back to the late medieval manuscript, where there might have just been a single copy. And so a reader would consult this book, and it would be probably chained to the shelf, and then it would be unchained and rechained to the lectern, where the reader could continue with his study.
I believe I've heard that they would stand at the lectern.
They would have to stand at the lectern, and when you look at the bosses which are here, there are a couple that are missing, but you can get a sense of these bosses here, which are intended to protect the book and to allow it to stand, if you like, away from the next book. So people recognized that books were things of considerable value. As one looks at this, it is really a cornucopia of phrases. This would be a way of finding a particular quotation. I suppose that the modern equivalent would be a book of quotations. Mm-hmm. It's exactly that. And books of quotation in Latin. So when you think about it, this is something that even nowadays, if you went to the Bracken Library to look something up, you would expect to find this in the reference section. So my earlier remarks about being able to borrow this, I have to take back, because this would be a book that would be for reference purposes only.
I think I've referred to it as the original special collections.
This is the original special collections in many respects, and I think it's a great way of describing it. Notice it's also a clasped volume, and if you needed to consult it, it would be taken down, and then you could consult it from your lectern as you stood there.
Okay, thank you. Archives and Special Collections has many examples of early books and early printed books. But we're going to leap ahead now just a little bit and into the late 19th century. It was that time when William Morris led the revival of interest in late medieval manuscripts and printed books. So in this segment, we're going to examine some of the works of William Morris and the Kelmscott Press, and also look at the work of Frederic Goudy, who came a little bit later. Dr. Felsenstein, would you share with us some of your expertise on William Morris as we look at some examples from the Kelmscott Press?
Well, thank you very much. The Kelmscott Press is the first of the modern private presses. William Morris, who was very much involved in the arts and crafts movement, toward the end of his life, fulfilled his ambition of setting up his own printing press. He set it up in 1891. He died in 1896. The press continued until 1898 and brought out a total of 53 discrete works. Of those, we have 3 very interesting complete examples, and we've chosen as one such example the story of the glittering plane. I think it's interesting to take this particular text. You can see how we begin with a title which rather looks like the half title that we held up earlier for one of the early books that we looked at. And what is so interesting about this is that it's a story that was written by William Morris himself. And so you have an example here of somebody who is both the author and the publisher of his own book. Not only that, Morris designed all the decorations that you're going to find, and his books are profuse with most beautiful decorations. And he also commissioned among the leading artists of the day, in this case, he commissioned Walter Crane to do illustrations for this. The Story of the Glittering Plane is the only book that he actually printed twice, because Walter Crane had not completed the illustrations the first time round, and The Story of the Glittering Plane was the very, very first book that Kelmscott published. And then later on, when the illustrations were complete, this is the time when Morris asked Crane to redo these things. Here is a photograph of the original drawing which Crane made, and then you can see the illustration as it appears in the volume itself. Morris was fascinated with early printing, and his greatest achievement is, of course, the Kelmscott Chaucer, which I'm just going to briefly hold up. This is a facsimile, of course, of the original. And it's interesting that one of the things which Morris was particularly interested in doing was developing different typefaces. These are the 3 different typefaces that he developed. 2 of them are Gothic types, the Troy type and the Chaucer type, and then the Golden type, which is a Roman type that was based on the work of a number of Italian printers of the 15th century. Finally, it's very interesting that not only do we have good examples of William Morris's work, that in the special collection there is a discrete collection of works and manuscripts of Frederic Goudy, who is considered by many people to be the leading typographer in America in the early 20th century, who began his career in Chicago. And I just want to briefly show you some examples here. This is particularly interesting. It's a mock-up of a sheet, and the title of the work, I don't know if you can read it there, is Of the Friendship of Amis and Emile. This is, in effect, a book that William Morris had printed at the Kelmscott Press, and what Goudy has done is to insert his own type designs here. And what we do have, which is particularly interesting as one goes through the collection, are drawings by Goudy for particular letters. If you could hold that up.
Sure.
And here is Goudy's work on the alphabet. And you can see how from that drawing he moves towards different versions of the letter B. One other thing which I find very amusing, and perhaps it's a point to wrap up this discussion, John, is that among the ephemeral items that are there is this menu for Frederic Goudy's 74th birthday. And among the people who attended it was a man called Arthur Rushmore, a very significant figure. He had his own press in New Jersey called the Golden Hind Press. And here is Rushmore finally writing about his friend Frederic Goudy. Said a type founder's customer, "Howdy, have you got any type that ain't dowdy?" Said the type man, "You bet, you ain't seen nothing yet. Here's 109, all by Goudy."
That's wonderful. And that, like you say, that's part of our Goudy collection in the Archives and Special Collections. And we have an exhibit up right now at this particular time on Frederic Goudy also. Well, thank you, Dr. Felsenstein. This has been very interesting, and I thank you for all your insights into these books and manuscripts that are in Archives and Special Collections in the Bracken Library.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. More information about rare books and manuscripts, as well as other parts of the collection, can be found on the Archives and Special Collections webpage at www.bsu.edu/library/collections/archives. I invite you to contact Special Collections by telephone, email, letter, or come by and visit us in Bracken Library, room 210.